My name is Neal Gardner and welcome to the very first episode of the Neal Talks Football Podcast. This has been a long time making behind the scenes and I'm so excited to finally get going. And to commemorate the first episode, we have a great guest, someone I've known and followed on Twitter and now on YouTube for a very long time, the Purist. Hello, mate. Welcome to the first episode.
Hello, thank you so much for having me. Very excited. I saw your announcement post yesterday. People were absolutely hyped for this podcast. So, a real great honor to be the very first guest. Thank you for having me.
No, yeah, I think the hype probably stems from me taking ages to actually start something of my own because, I've made so many of these announcements, but I suppose it's not procrastination. It's just the fact that living in Australia and doing things remotely with the time difference, it's just so difficult to, nail something down, even just in terms of content.
Yeah.
And, I tried to do the YouTube thing. This will go up on YouTube as well as Spotify, but it was just so difficult to find editors and coordinate everything. So, yeah, I'm so glad that, now I'm working with a great producer behind the scenes and just ready to make a lot of content. And as for you, I mean, you truly, for me, when I was thinking about how to start this whole podcast, I thought of the Purist as the first name that came to my mind. I've been following you first on Twitter. I think I've been following you since the very beginning. I always resonated with the threads you used to do, the tactical threads, amid all sort of the sensationalism. I feel like the content you brought, added actual value to the space. And then on YouTube, the way you've grown. So it's so great to have you, mate. I think this just sets the tone for everything I want to do in content as well. So thank you for coming on.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And yeah, when you hit me up about this podcast, one of the things that you said was, avoiding the sensationalism and bringing value to people. And I think, we share that kind of cause in the football space. There's a lot of noise,
Yeah.
uh, otherwise. So yeah, I'm glad we can connect and do this.
Yeah, no, and apart from the noise, like I think I've taken a lot of inspiration from you as well because I used to obviously read your tweets on Twitter, and I write on my own, but you just can't go into same nuance and depth on Twitter. The format just doesn't allow it. I think you kind of get
Mm.
penalized for being in depth and trying to actually consider different sides and act with nuance. And I think the way you can get that across on speech is very different. So I suppose like on that line, my first question to you is how have you seen or noticed that sort of transition and how have you coped with it going from writing mainly to now also focusing on like the creative aspect and talking, making videos? How's that like transition been for you?
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's fulfilling really. You can show a wider scope of your creativity for one. But also, yeah, when it comes to the nuance of the analysis, you can for sure do a lot more with video. Being tied down to kind of the still images. I remember my Twitter account got briefly banned in the early days because I
Oh,
posted like a 2 second clip or something from a game. And that can happen on YouTube sometimes, but obviously you've got so
mhm.
much more scope to show what you're talking about and not just rely on these kind of still images and lines and whatever that I was doing back in the day. So yeah, it gives you just a lot more space, I suppose, and the audience is a bit different as well. I must admit, I think the discourse on Twitter X
Mm.
has gone pretty south in some ways, and um, yeah, I mean, I don't want to start off negatively, but you know how it is. You
Yeah.
run an account with a lot of followers, so yeah, it's just a little bit different on YouTube. You engage with people in a slightly different way, which I've really enjoyed. I think.
Well, it's interesting you actually say that. So I write a lot of papers, mainly academic, and recently I've been trying to incorporate a lot of what I've learned on Twitter also into my writing. So I was reading an article, a journal article, just before we started this about how it's not actually true that. So the gist of the article is that the negativity gets preferred by the algorithm, but the study found that that's not actually how the majority sort of resonate and relate with certain content. So the the more like-minded people are less likely to engage, and the more sort of controversial, polarized, radicalized sort of people are much more likely to actually be the ones retweeting and spreading the visibility. So
Right.
I think sometimes it's almost like this warped reality where, the virtual world and the real world sort of mix, but if you're online as chronically as I am, I think you sometimes miss that, this isn't an accurate reflection of maybe the consensus. It's very different actually. So yeah, I just find that very interesting.
Yeah, super interesting. And it makes sense, generally when you put good stuff out, you do tend to get a response from maybe a minority, but that
Yeah.
really resonates with you, and you do see those people out there for sure.
Yeah, and I think negativity just generally catches your eye more. Like sometimes, my tweets, so many people will like them, so many people will engage with them, but it's that one annoying comment that
Mhm.
catches my attention, and that's what I'll like will play on my mind. So I think it's just kind of human nature sometimes to get drawn to it, like feel like you need to defend yourself or yeah.
Yeah, that is true for sure, and that's been a learning curve, and something that I've had to learn to manage a lot better, is not engaging with it, and remembering that, there's a lot of stuff that you can't control, and negativity online is certainly one of them.
Yeah, no, completely agree. Well, as we know, most people on here are probably going to segue now to the actual football. We're both Barcelona fans, of course. Before I start, talking about specific issues, I kind of just want to know where you're at with the team, like looking forward to the season. Are you more on the optimistic side or the pessimistic side? And maybe just like a brief overview of some of the things that maybe concern you or some that excite you.
Yeah, for sure. I'll admit I'm really happy as a Barcelona fan right now.
Yeah.
I think, what the turnaround in feeling that's happened throughout the Flick era has made me really enjoy watching football games, and that's, aside from anything else that we can talk about, is really, as a fan, the most important thing. If you're looking forward to watching your team play, then I think that's as good as it gets, and so I'm
Yeah.
really really enjoying the football. I'm really enjoying the direction. I'm really enjoying the choices that Flick has made in identifying and prioritizing, where the talent is in the squad,
Hmm.
and platforming it. Um, and yeah, so regardless of specific results and tactical nuances that we talk about, I think it's just good to enjoy watching your team play. As far as expectations go, I think you can reasonably expect Barcelona to compete for every title this season. I think the quality certainly is high enough. The ceiling of the players certainly is high enough. The squad depth potentially is a question, but I think it's good enough to at least compete for the league and the Champions League. And yeah, I think obviously the strengths of the squad are in its firepower. Really, its
Hmm.
creativity and its ability to score goals. Last season we saw an abundance of goals scored in a real variety of ways as well.
Yeah.
And then the natural consequence of that is the major, you know, or the concern that you would have is, of course, shipping goals is the defensive side of the game. And I think it appears to me, the Newcastle game that I'm sure we'll talk about was a good example.
Yeah.
It does appear to me that there's been some maturing or a desire to mature in some aspects of the game to manage the balance of the team better. And yeah, I look forward to seeing how that develops. But of course, with the way the team attacks and the risks they take defensively, that you are concerned in some games that Barcelona are going to ship goals.
Yeah. Yeah, no. First of all, I really sort of resonate with what you said about just sort of enjoying games. I think that's something we kind of get lost in the social media bubble where you're constantly trying to make conclusions and draw conclusions and sort of put content out for people. But the fact of the matter is, since last season, this has been one of the most enjoyable times in my life as a Barcelona fan. I've been a Barcelona fan for a long time, and I feel like the squad as well is so likable, so many young players. It's just something we can all get behind. And I think Flick's done a great job, as you said, in platforming the players. Um, on that note, one sort of criticism I've heard from Bayern fans especially is that, in Flick's second season, things go things go wrong. When he had his second full season, it's not as sustainable. The players can burn out. The mandates are very demanding. Well, personally, I have my own thoughts about that, but is that something you've ever thought about? The risk of burnout, especially with a relatively sort of thin squad in certain areas. If we look at like the fullbacks and also maybe lacking a proper replacement for Lamine Yamal as well.
Yeah, I think that's reasonable. It's a reasonable concern to have. I mean, you can look even at the Xavi era as a kind of template. You know, people talk a lot about the intensity of Flick's game, the high line, and all the rest of it. Well, Barcelona will try to be really intense under Xavi as well, with a similar
Mhm.
thinness in the squad, you could say. And yeah, it did suffer for that, especially with the injuries that came around by the second season. And in the
Yeah.
end, that was what kind of ended that era. We can talk about tactics all day long, but the biggest difference between that era and this one is that Flick's had a fully fit Pedri, the classic trademark fully fit Pedri to rely on, and he's had Lamine Yamal come into the team and consistency of quality players. Whereas in big games during the Xavi era, we saw Sergio Roberto feature hugely. Players like Frank Kessie and guys that weren't up to that level.
Yeah.
So the big thing that could derail all of this that we're talking about is injuries and burnout. And it will be interesting to see how that's managed. I think Flick's already talks a lot about rotation this season, and it's going to be a big feature. So we'll see. It's very hard for me looking, so far away from the camp to actually give a judgment on
Yeah.
physical load and all that kind of thing. I'm no expert on biomechanics or anything, but yeah, it's a concern that you would have certainly.
Yeah, I sort of I agree. I think obviously the financial situation constrains us, but in an ideal world, we would have been able to sort of be better equipped at dealing with the physical mandates, especially now with the fixture list becoming incredibly condensed, probably more condensed than ever. But at the same time, I think I speak about this with people on Twitter, especially La Liga Michael and people of that sort. I think Flick's sort of game model is quite suited to La Liga side most of the time, and even without the depth, like we can get away with having Joe Martin sometimes, or Rashford now. I think Rashford is a big signing, and if Araujo and Christensen come in. So in that regard, I am fairly confident that things should be all right. I mean, I think it's a different issue when you go to the Champions League. Like for example, last season, we started our biggest game in the Champions League without Balade, and I think for me, Balade is incredibly important. I'll come to you about
Mhm.
how you think about it, but for me, like when you go into these games, we know how Barcelona can be exposed with the high line, especially when sides sort of go wide and stretch the pitch, and having Jared Martin instead of Balade on that flank, I think can be a big problem. And we saw a little bit of it against Newcastle as well, where Alanga was just sort of running past him like he wasn't even
Mhm.
there on a few occasions. Martin did sort of do a little bit better as the game went on. But Langa isn't even a world beater. He isn't someone we're going to come against. He's going to come up against much more accomplished wingers. So I suppose is that a clear weakness you see in the side when if and when Balade isn't available, which to be honest is quite often these days.
Yeah, it is, and I do think it's a concern. I think the fullback areas in general are an area of the pitch
Mhm,
that Barcelona don't have a lot of strength and depth. And you're totally right about his importance. I completely agree. Offensively and defensively, probably
mhm,
defensively more so. I think I would put forward an argument, a tentative argument, that Gerard Martin in the final third can maybe contribute just as much, if not more, than
mhm,
Valde. But it's really the ability to run the other way that's so important. He gets isolated. That player with the way that Barcelona press gets isolated so often. Um, is having to make up so much ground if the opponents do break the high line, the offside trap. It's very natural that the team suffers. And to be fair, it's hard to account for an injury like Balde because a player like that is pretty rare.
yeah,
It's not so easy to just replace that. But yeah, I do agree. If it's one area of the pitch that does concern me, I think you know we have a direct example in the Inter games last
Hmm.
season. You know, high stakes games. Balde's out, and you're not really comfortable with Gerard Martin there. So
Yeah.
yeah, it's unfortunate. There's not a lot Barcelona can do about that right now.
Yeah.
Um, Obviously, Torrents is an option. We haven't seen too much of him, but yeah, I'll be interested to see if Flick starts to balance his minutes a bit more with Gerard
Yeah.
Martin.
Well, speaking about that, like I've obviously heard a few murmurs on Twitter. Based on the first few games of the season, have you noticed like an adjustment that Flick's made, especially like after the international break? Because going into the Newcastle game, I thought apart from the first sort of 15, 20 minutes, we actually did a pretty good job at curtailing the threat and like at limiting the chances. Have you noticed that maybe the line has gone a little bit further back, or would you say there's a different tactical change that sort of prompted a bit more solidity, especially looking at that Newcastle game?
Yeah, it's interesting. I can't remember exactly who it was. Somebody mentioned to me that they noticed Barcelona's fullbacks being a little less aggressive in the
Hmm.
press, not pressing up. You see sometimes teams that press man to man, they'll have the fullbacks step all the way up and press the opposition fullbacks, and that Barcelona weren't doing that, and actually leaving a +1 in the back line, and that's potentially one slight tweak that Flick is making to become more solid. But
Mm.
overall, the general ideas remain the same. I think
Yeah.
you still see the line very very high. You still see them trying to spring the offside trap. Um, Potentially one thing is that, and this is quite an interesting point actually, is that I think the whole purpose of the high line is to avoid Barcelona having to defend in a block. It's one of
Hmm.
its purposes anyway, because it is a major weakness of the team, I would say. With Pedri and De Jong as your two centre midfielders, obviously neither of them bad ball winners, but and Pedri's actually become quite a good one. But in terms of a solid block and having players in there who are very assured and experienced in playing in a block, it's not the most solid that you'll ever see.
Hmm.
If you compare it to a lot of top teams, I mean, Arsenal's block are probably the gold standard in football right now.
Yeah.
You compare the solidity to that kind of mid block or even low block to what Barcelona can do when pushed back. It doesn't feel particularly safe to me,
Yeah.
and that was a problem that I did have a few years ago when Barca were defending more in a block. And so, actually, the decision making of how to balance the high line and then at what point do you concede that you step back into a block? I think that's a really interesting tactical nuance that has to
Mm.
be balanced basically. Um, because I don't particularly like watching this team defend in a block, if I'm honest with you. It may be very hair-raising to see the high line and opponents, whisker away from creating chances, but I think in the main, it's actually preferable,
Mm.
especially when you don't give opponents a chance to build in the way that they wanna do, and that's another reason for playing the high line. So, yeah, I think it's early. It's too early for me to give any definitive answer as to which way Flick is going this season. More aggressive
Yeah.
on the high line, more conservative dropping into a block. But it's something to watch out for, I think.
Well, no, I think you've hit the nail on the coffin there. When you talk about how Flick has sort of platformed this side, to me, it seems he's just trying to maximize the profiles he's got. Of course, that goes into his style of football, but, we have this recency bias thing. If we go back to when Flick came in, everyone, the whole conversation was about, oh, no natural DM, no deal win
Yeah.
in the midfield. How are we going to defend? Javi's defensive structure at the end was a complete mess. So I think Flick's come in and he's like, okay, well, we don't have this, and I don't have the money to go to the market and spend 100 million or 70 million on someone like a Zubimendi, but I can maximize the squad I've got. And then look at the players we have up front. We've got Rafinha, we've got Pedri, we've got Lewandowski. And I think a lot of it, of course, comes down to the midfield. It's the Frankie and Pedri pivot. So when I look at this squad, I think probably the best thing Flick's done is make use of the players he's got and platform them. I mean, who could have thought? I couldn't have thought that a Pedri pivot would work at this level consistently, sustainably, and And it is, and we're talking about it being, at least in possession, one of the best pivots in the world. And I think that's, I couldn't really conceive that before Flick came in, and I was so concerned about our need to sign a proper DM. I made Oriol Romero my saving grace. So that's just, yeah.
Yeah, I totally agree with you, and it's the thing about Flick that I'm the happiest with. The fact that, like you say, he's just platforming the qualities of the players, and I've always said actually that pivot is potentially one of the best in the world, and
Mhm.
the fact that you can conceive of a defensive strategy to adapt to that is just it's actually so rare in football now to see that kind of adaptation. I mean, the manager that I keep hating on, and I probably shouldn't as much, but Ruben Amorim at Man United, the whole world is talking about him.
Yeah.
It's low hanging fruit, I know, but
Yeah.
he does represent the polar opposite, right? The polar opposite of saying, no, we're playing this way and we need to have specific types of players to make it work.
Yeah.
It was kind of like that under Xavi a little bit as well. It was always the conversation, like how do we get the right profiles for the system? Flick's completely switched it around, and I love that personally.
Yeah, and I don't know how. I sort of think I remember your sort of opinions going into Flick before he came in, and it was kind of similar to mine in a way. Like, I obviously knew that Flick was a great manager. The things he achieved at Bayern were remarkable, but I was kind of surprised by um the adaptability in a way. I thought that we weren't quite set up to play that brand of football, especially like thinking about how important Goretzka was for his Bayern side, right? Like that profile in the midfield alongside Kimmich a lot of the time than Thiago. But I wonder if Flick sort of come in after his Germany stint and tried to, not obviously it's still the same principles, not reinvent himself, but be a little bit more adaptable and change his philosophy a little bit in that sense. And I think he saw maybe this Barcelona side as a great way to start.
Yeah, 100%. And yeah, I for sure was I was not convinced by Flick. Not necessarily because I thought he was a bad manager, but because
Yeah.
the circumstances that he had at Bayern felt so different to me.
Mhm.
A squad that was much more mature, players much more in their peak, and again, like you said, the kind of physical profiles that you thought were necessary to play that way. But yeah, it's absolutely his ability to adapt that has made
Yeah.
him such a success so far. And I hope more managers follow that kind of pattern, to be honest, to look at what you have and try and maximize that.
Yeah, no, it really is a problem. Like, I know we keep going back to Amarim, but, like, I am shocked by, like, how rigid he's being on the other hand, but, I think even managers like Pep Guardiola have adapted. If you look at Pep a long
Hmm.
time ago as Pep now, I think it's very much the norm to sort of the best managers have to adapt. I think that's just the mandate of the sport now. You can't keep going with the very rigid style because I think teams as well on the other hand are so much more versatile and well equipped to hurt you. Um, but I think the stance Flick's taken, especially in La Liga, is do you sort of see why Barcelona's style, especially last season, took La Liga by such a big shock? I think, like, culturally, they came in and just started steamrolling sides, attack, attack, attack. So you can stay in your low block, you can shack back up if you want, but for how long are you going to curtail the likes of Pedri and Yamal and Rafinha with the runs in behind? And I think that is something that we missed. It was always about being in possession, controlling the game. But what about just being direct sometimes, coming in with that firepower and trying to blow sides away? Um, do you sort of see why La Liga side sort of haven't been able to combat that sort of culture shock?
Yeah, for sure. And I mentioned earlier the kind of variation in attacking football that Barcelona are now capable of, and I think that's the key. Um, it's one thing having a blueprint of how you want to control the game and the kind of controlled manner with which you establish territory and then produce, numerical advantages or whatever. But as you alluded to, everybody kind of knows what everybody else is trying to do,
Yeah,
and having that variation that Barcelona found last season with Lamine Yamal out wide, giving a huge threat, in 1v1, 1v2 situations, but then also Rafinha being able to stretch the back line coming into crosses or balls over the top or whatever. And then you had, Olmo came in for a short stint to give you kind of
Yeah.
higher level of quality in tight spaces. And
Mhm.
so it was, you felt like there was no way to defend against that team that didn't leave open some sort of advantage. And I think, that's I do see Barcelona as a kind of front runner for European
Mhm.
clubs amongst some of the best in the ways that they're attacking. And it's not rigid, it's not predictable.
Yeah.
I think it can be even better actually, but
Yeah.
it's certainly yeah, like you say, going to take teams by storm and certainly has.
Now, like, I will, I want to get to all of this in a bit more depth, position by position. But one of the things that does concern me about this side is maybe the CB situation as well. I think I totally get why Inigo Martinez was moved on and he wanted to leave. This stage in his career, wanting to take that payday is totally understandable. But he was a very big part of that side last season, especially in holding the high line, his chemistry with Kobasi, and also from a ball playing and build up perspective, the angles he opened up, and I think that took me by great surprise. And on the other hand, you have Araujo and Christensen who've spent over the last 12 months on the sideline consistently with injuries, and with Araujo's form has also been up and down, and he's I think he's been scapegoated a little bit unfairly as well. But how do you sort of see the CB situation? And if you had to choose sort of an ideal pairing, or maybe ideal is a bit of a loaded word, but maybe depending on the game state or the opponent, how would you sort of go about mitigating that CB situation? And do you think losing Inigo is a big loss without signing a quote unquote like for like replacement?
Yeah, I think it is a loss. It's hard to say. I do look at the quality that Barcelona still have in that position, and I'm not sure. Of course, he's left-footed, which does make a difference. Like you alluded to, the angles that he's able to find. Um, but in terms of quality of defender and quality of ball player, I think Barcelona still have that within the squad.
Hmm.
I see his loss probably bigger from a leadership perspective. In a very very young team, just to have a guy who's over 30 makes a big difference. Um, but yeah, in terms of the players that are available, I do think for me, Kubasi obviously is by far and away the first choice
Hmm.
centre back. Um, Offensively, defensively, just an absolute master of the game at 18, which is ridiculous. Um, but alongside him, it is interesting. I think Araujo showed his qualities and the kind of situations that he thrives in that Newcastle game.
Yeah.
I spoke earlier about being a bit more cautious with leaving a +1 on the back line. It's not something you have to worry about as much if you've got Araujo, because with the duels, with the running in behind, that's his strength, right? Like that's what he's really good at.
Yeah.
In terms of more balance, it's quite interesting. In Eric Garcia, Christensen, and Araujo, you've kind of got the three potential pillars. You've got the extreme ball player in Eric Garcia. You've got the extreme kind of hustle defender in Araujo, and then you've got Christensen, who's kind of in the middle. And
Hmm.
I do like Christensen probably the most if you just giving me a random game, say who's a centre back partner to Kubasi, I'd probably say I like Christensen, because again, I think he's a better box defender than both Araujo and Eric Garcia. Um, I think he's a better ball player, much better ball player than Araujo, and that becomes seriously important in some games when you monopolize possession.
Yeah.
Uh, and yeah, he for me is a kind of nice blend between the two. But having these binaries is not really that important,
Hmm.
because especially in the league season, everybody is contributing. Every game, most games require something a little bit different. Again, if you're going to monopolize possession, well, then maybe Eric Garcia is the guy,
Hmm.
and he's been thoroughly reliable so far. And so, yeah, I think it's nice that Barcelona have the option of all three of those types of players to call on, and you don't feel like the team gets significantly weakened with any of them. So,
Yeah.
yeah, I'm quite happy. I'm quite optimistic, although, as I said right at the beginning, it is the area of the pitch in which probably is the least,
Mm.
let's say, like world class, the least absolutely elite.
Yeah. Well, I sort of have a question for you, the analyst. Now, let's say we face a high level pressing team like Newcastle is an example, but they didn't quite have the offensive ability to sort of hurt us in that regard. But looking at the Champions League, we know that Araujo, like you said, is the best out and out defender, but simultaneously, in terms of his ball playing abilities, he can be targeted. You know, remember that video of Luis Enrique when PSG played us? Was it 2 years ago, or last year when Xavi was the manager in the Champions League, and he sort of particularly singled out Araujo and said, "This guy, press him. He basically can't contribute with the ball." So in that regard, how do you sort of see the balance? Do you go with the out and out defender against a side that is going to potentially press very high and has the offensive ability to take advantage of it, or do you sort of say, you know what, Araujo, he does defend the best. His recovery speed is also, extremely good. He has very high physical attributes. So I suppose what is the perfect balance there in those sort of games specifically where we're talking about the latter stages of the Champions League against a side like PSG, for example?
Yeah, I think in those kind of games, you need to maximize your strengths, and Barcelona are
Hmm.
best when they have the ball. And, the sacrifice that you make with Araujo, the fact that he is targeted by opponent pressing schemes, it's not worth it for me, particularly when I would argue that Christensen, outside of 1v1 duels, is a
Hmm.
better defender than Araujo. I think he's better, like I said, in the box. I think he's better, even, at just standing up and dealing
Yep.
with danger. I think he's less rash. He's a bit more clever. And so I think in those games where you're under pressure from, a very aggressive team, I think you want Barcelona to be having as much of the ball as possible in that game. And to me, that means you go for Christensen or Eric.
Yeah. Well, it's
Yeah.
interesting you say that as well because I agree with you completely. Every time I sort of make an ideal lineup post on Twitter, I always have Christensen and Kubasi as my two centre backs because I think Christensen gives you the best balance. I'd also say that he's probably the best at holding a high line. We've seen this before, especially at Chelsea as well. I think his understanding and awareness of space is second to none in a lot of ways. But at the same time, we've seen Flick I sense a certain hesitance to start Christensen. Now, this could just be because of his physical situation. He's been injured for a long time. Maybe Flick suggested the intensity might be a little bit too much from right now. But so far, um, we haven't really seen that Christensen Kubasi CB pairing sustainably. And I wonder if you think, are there any potential downsides that Flick's looking at? Because so far, if he wants to monopolize ball playing, he almost always goes for Eric Garcia. And if he wants to go physical, like that Newcastle game, I thought Christensen was going to start. But it was Araujo who started, and I find that a little bit interesting.
Yeah, it is interesting, and in all these decisions, there's probably plenty happening that we're unaware of. You
Mhm.
also have to remember that Araujo is, one of the club captains,
Yep.
and probably represents more of a leadership figure within the team, and those are the kind of things that can swing a decision in those kind of environments, those high stakes games. So it is hard to see, but from a footballing perspective, I'm with you. I'm slightly confused as to why Christensen isn't being used more. But again, it could just be, Eric Garcia has been reliable,
Yep.
and there's no reason to drop him. Essentially,
Mhm.
uh, you know, uh, a lot goes into a manager's decision that we can't really um, necessarily understand looking at it from a distance. So I
Yeah.
would like to see Christensen more, but at the moment, it's not. You can't say it's costing the team. So you know.
Yeah. And talking about the back line, the last thing, of course, is a right back situation. Now, Koundé has been the guy. He's been extremely consistent for us. Even against Newcastle, he came in and played a great role. But Eric Garcia, if you actually hone in on his performances at right back, I think he's been very, very good, very solid, very consistent. How do you see that dynamic? Do you think Eric Garcia is potentially at that level, especially with his ball playing and possessional upsides, to challenge Christensen at that right back spot? And sort of the big question here is, how do you see both of them working alongside Lamine Yamal? Do you have a preference as to who you think sort of works better in tandem?
Yeah, I think for now, the chemistry that Koundé and Lamine Yamal have built is probably at a higher level than what he has with Eric Garcia. But I will say that I have been impressed with Eric as a right back. Like you said, I think his ball playing ability does lend itself to that position, and also potentially minimizes the weaknesses that he does have
Hmm.
physically. But I don't know quite yet if I would bank on him in those kind of high stakes games. It's one of those that I think I need to see a little bit more of.
Yeah.
Realistically, what you're doing when you're partnering Lamine Yamal on that flank is really an understanding and a sensitivity to his movement. Um, and kind of what he needs in every situation, right? Does he want an underlapping run? Does he want you to hold back and draw a marker away from him? That kind of thing. And I think in
Hmm.
those regards, both Eric and Koundé do a pretty good job. They're both quite forward thinking um, and adventurous, considering that they're both kind of centre backs by trade, really.
Yeah.
So again, it's one of those situations where until it goes wrong, it seems fine, but we're
Hmm.
not completely convinced that it's gonna be, a really good solution for a big game. Speaking of
Yeah.
Eric Garcia, I mean.
Well, I kind of just see it as a positive in a lot of different ways. Like, I think having the competition, I think the fact that we don't know who our ideal CB pairing is can be construed as a negative, but at the same time, you look at the profiles and everything they bring to the table, and you kind of say, well, Flick has a lot of leeway here to mix and match according to the game state and the opposition. The same goes for
Mhm.
the right back situation. I think in La Liga, a lot of the times there is a place for Eric to come in and be a bit more monopolizing in possession against a lot of the sides that sort of sit back. Hitafe might be a game where Flick sort of prefers him as well. But even there's even more competition in what I want to lead up to, which is the midfield. I mean, we all would, let's talk about the Newcastle game a little bit, because for me it was all about Pedri and Frankie De Jong. The way, especially in that second half, the way they took the game by the scruff of the neck and sort of managed it, saw it out, but also played some beautiful football. I've seen so many stats and so many tweets from Newcastle fans talking about Pedri, especially being one of the best players, the best player they've ever seen live. And as a Barcelona fan, of course, first and foremost, that makes me so proud. But it's also like, where is the English media been for so long? Pedri isn't a new kid on the block. He's been doing this consistently now for a very long time. And to be honest, that probably was close to a standard Pedri performance. Like this, the guy does stuff like this on almost a weekly basis now. But how did you see the Newcastle game, and how impressed were you with Pedri and Frankie especially?
Yeah, I love it. It's those kind of performances are why I watch football, honestly.
Hmm.
The kind of just the almost supernatural level of calm, of control. I loved the fact that we saw such an aggressive and a strategy based so much on running and aggression be kind of tempered by just pure elegance and footballing quality. It was yeah, I was really, really excited about that performance, and I do think that we talk enough about Pedri. He's, in my opinion, and I'm happy to say this, I think he might be the best player in the world.
Hmm.
Um, but we can't forget that Frankie De Jong is absolutely outstanding,
Hmm.
and I completely understand some of the criticisms of him. I think particularly defensively, there are times when he lacks awareness of what's going on around him.
Hmm.
Totally get that. But the people that criticize his football in possession, I can't fathom, to be honest.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
Go on.
No, I was just going to say that when you spoke about the criticisms, I think a lot of the people sort of fixate on his ability or his tendency to hold the ball for a very long time, and I sort of don't get that, because it's so valuable. Like his carrying and the way he wades pressure is so valuable, especially alongside a circulator and a progressor like Pedri. I just see them working together in harmony so well, and we saw that against Newcastle. Frankie, the way he slowed the game down sometimes when Newcastle were all out physical, trying to press us extremely high. And I just thought Frankie was so composed, and he just didn't lose the ball. And then you gave it to Pedri. Pedri bears forward, progressed the ball forward. I just see that as a great combination, and I think it's sometimes a bit detrimental to have a profile alongside Pedri who would be bold and ambitious and try and be ultra progressive.
Yeah, I agree. And I think I'm glad that you brought up his tendency to hold on to the ball because it is something that people get confused about. And I do think that's a kind of conditioning that's come about in the game from, a Pep Guardiola world, to be completely honest
Mhm,
with you. A world that is based on one-touch passing, that's based on very quick circulation, moving the ball from zone to zone quickly. And Frankie de Jong plays football in a way that is kind of contradictory to that. And there's
mhm,
nothing wrong with that. In fact, like you said, it's extremely valuable in a lot of moments. Um, Against teams that are set up to press spaces. If he can just receive a pass and completely nullify that press with the ball at his feet, he's done an incredible job. Not only that, but it gives the rest of the time. It gives time for the rest of the team to settle. It gives time for Pedri to move a little bit more. Everybody's not just locked in position. It gives
mhm.
a rhythm to Barcelona's football that is just different from a lot of other teams, and that's valuable. It's not something to be looked at as a problem. And it was for a long time, precisely because Barcelona are generally built on what would have been the Pep Guardiola foundation, and it's what
Mhm.
Xavi was trying to implement, and he was an issue in that system as well for the same reason. But like I said earlier, by putting the quality of the players first, you actually find something that maybe you didn't expect to happen, and that
Mhm.
that Pedri Frankie partnership is a really great reflection of that, I think. And I love watching the two of them. I love watching
Yeah.
Frankie De Jong as well.
Yeah.
And yeah.
Well, I sort of go back to something you said as well about not getting stuck up in the binaries. I think, especially in the midfield, people have this very rigid sort of definition between technicality and physicality.
Hmm.
But the truth is, when you look at Pedri and Frankie, of course, they are supreme technicians, great passers. But if you look at their physicality, I think they're tremendous physically as well. Frankie, with his running power and sort of how dominant he can be, especially even in like winning second balls, mitigating counters, the raw physical attributes are definitely there. And if you look at Pedri, the amount of ground he covers on a weekly basis, I mean, his engine is remarkable. And as you said, he's become one of the best second ball and duel winners as well in the sport. So how do you sort of see why people get stuck up in that technicality, physicality binary? Is it just how the player looks? Like if you're a bit
Yeah.
scrawny and is that just it?
Yeah, I think it could be, to be honest. I mean, to be fair, in a world of so much football discourse and so many players to have to talk about, it's kind of tempting to just label a player this and label another player that,
Hmm.
and forget to see these people as human beings that have a lot of are very multifaceted and also can develop. I mean, I
Hmm.
remember watching Pedri struggle on a consistent
Hmm.
basis to run for 90 minutes,
Yeah.
just a few years ago, and the difference now is astounding. I mean, if you'd looked at that player and put him in I'm going to use the classic example, an English academy, they'd probably look at him and say, well, he doesn't have the engine for it.
Yeah.
Um, but players develop, they add different parts to their game, and yeah, you can't, if you're going to do serious analysis of any player, you can't create some sort of static profile of them because that's just not how human
Yeah.
beings are.
I also think like this is something coaches, people, including myself, we sort of try and label football as, oh, he's great at doing this. He's a runner. He's a passer. He's technical. He's physical. It's sort of this inherent human tendency to look for relational or rational links in players that help you sort of understand them better. But when you actually look at a human being, and that's what a footballer is at the end of the day, we're so multifaceted inherently, and players can develop and can improve. And I think with Frankie as well, you look at him a few years ago, and then we the whole fan base was talking about him very differently. There was talks about his consistency with Xavi. I think he was so exposed a lot of the time, especially playing more in a single pivot in that second season as well. But if you look at the difference now, I think Flick, first of all, has platformed that, as we've spoken about, platformed them together perfectly for their strengths. But there's also a very clear natural evolution and progression. And I think Frankie de Jong, for him, this season is huge because now I think he's finally established and solidified himself within the fan base. The perception around him is very high, in terms of his stocks. I don't like using that word, but how do you see his evolution? And do you think he is the guy to partner Pedri in the midfield? Because as we say, Barcelona, our midfield is absolutely stacked. It's not just Frankie and Pedri. There's also Gavi. There's also Marc Bernal. There's also Casado. Especially Gavi and Bernal. These are huge players. These are players with immense potential. Um, do you see a scenario where it is a little bit better to maybe revert back to a more traditional 4-3-3, or do you continue with this Frankie Pedri pivot and have either Olmo or Firmino as that attacking midfield or the 10?
Yeah, I think it's a really difficult question. The obvious answer is to retain it for as long as it's working. And like I said earlier, it looks like one of the best midfield partnerships in the world, and that we've seen for a while. It's really outstanding, and
Mhm.
to mess with that would seem a little bit unnecessary. Of course,
Mhm.
like we said, we don't want to create this binary situation, because in a situation like, the last 10 minutes, it's good to have Casado to throw on. It's really useful to have a player like that
Mhm.
to be able to throw on. And there's going to be games in the league where you need to rotate, and players like Gavi, Casado, Bernal, they're going to be able to contribute. But if we're talking about, the synergies within this squad that create the best football, Pedri and Frankie de Jong, as they
Mhm.
exist right now, as a kind of dual orchestrating, base of the team, is just exceptional, and is you don't need to change it.
Mhm.
Um, One thing I do want to say, just to go back a little bit on something you mentioned uh, about kind of player profiles and labeling players and
Mhm.
whatnot. I think, we're moving on to an era now where we've been in a very established era, and it's going to continue, where we see players extremely through an individual lens. We say
Mhm.
this player's good at doing this and they're not good at doing this, and all the rest of it. But I think we are kind of advancing in our understanding of how people and players work, and they work in synergy, in community. And when you put a player like Frankie de Jong alongside somebody like Pedri, you kind of get something. You get something more. You get more than the sum of their parts, if you know what I mean.
Mhm.
And so to look at players through such an individualistic lens kind of misses the real magic of football, and the things that we can unlock within players when you pair them with players that work.
Yeah.
Um, so I just wanted to say that, because I think, I see so much analysis online of players, and it feels really reductive a lot of the time, because it doesn't appreciate or acknowledge the kind of context they're going to be playing in, and most importantly, the kind of partnerships they're going to be making on the pitch that actually contribute to how good they are.
Mate, I think that sort of what you've said right now perfectly kind of encapsulates why I wanted to do a podcast in the first place. Like, I think this sort of stuff you just can't get into on Twitter without somebody coming in and commenting and going crazy about it. I think getting the essence across is very important. And I completely agree with you. Like, even when we talk about this Barcelona side, it is so heavily founded on that synergy. You're talking about the combination between profiles and how they work together. Even if you look at the dynamic between Lamine Yamal and Rafinha and Lewandowski, it's just so they really, it is a symbiotic relationship in a lot of different ways, and I think, like you said, any analysis has to account for that, and I think you've done so perfectly.
Yeah, for sure. I just think it's the direction that we need to be moving in.
Yeah.
A little bit more complex and nuanced, as I'm sure you would agree.
I definitely agree. And talking about like the midfield as well, the next part is a bit controversial. This is so split online on Twitter, especially maybe because I'm chronically online. But the the competition between Olmo and Fermin Lopez. Now, again, very different profiles, but I want to know your take on who you think is um, more adept at their best, or would you say again, like we spoke about with the centre backs and with Kunde and Eric, that it is very much a game state dependent sort of contextual application of either? So which side do you sort of lean on?
I think, generally speaking, and this kind of is what you would expect considering the stage of their careers that they're at, is that Dani Olmo is a more polished footballer.
Hmm.
I think at their best, and that's a crucial, statement because they're not always at their best, and Olmo's injury issues have been really damaging. But at their best, I think Dani Olmo brings a lot to this team.
Hmm.
I see Firmino kind of, when you look at Firmino's strengths, what he does really well,
Yeah,
um, it reminds me of kind of, initially when Rafinha came to the club, he was seen as kind of a creator, right? And now he's a lot more of a finisher. He's kind of the outlet. He's the guy right at the end of the move. And Firmino feels a little bit like that to me in the way he naturally plays the game.
yeah,
He sits in that half space and will do everything nice and tidy and will keep the ball moving. But when he comes alive is in the box or just outside the box. Um, and Olmo, for me, can do that, but then he also has that extra little bit, in kind of build up, in combination, in a little bit more subtlety in the way that he understands the movement of players around him. And I'm not saying that isn't something that Firmino can't develop.
hmm,
Maybe he won't. Maybe he's a different type of player. But I think that extra degree of sensitivity really to his teammates is why I generally prefer Olmo. That
yeah,
said, I think Firmino is exceptional, and any team in the world would love to have a guy who so reliably can score goals. I mean, that's not a bad thing to say of any footballer.
yeah,
Um, and yeah, I'm very, very glad that Firmino's in the team. If he were to start a huge game, knockout game right now, I wouldn't be upset about it. He can deliver. He has like Rafinha, that ability to run in behind and attack space, which is extremely valuable. And so yeah, like it is a little bit game state dependent, but generally speaking, I fall slightly on the Olmo side of things. But
yeah,
it doesn't have to be one or the other. As we've been saying all podcasts, we can
yeah.
have both of them contributing a lot.
No, I definitely agree in the sense that at their best, I think that was a distinction I put forth, and it's important, and you answer that question. I suppose where I sort of stand is that sometimes, especially recently, it feels like the idea of Danny Olmo and what we can get out of him sort of supersedes what we actually do get. When I look at like their base levels, sometimes you put them into any given game. I think for men's sort of energy and mobility and his contributions in the press as well can sometimes seem a little bit more impactful than Danny Olmo when he's not having a good game, when he's not in his flow state. Um, I think if Olmo is fully fit and at his best, which to be honest, we haven't seen for long stretches because there's always an
Mhm.
injury that pops up and there's always some setback that sort of takes place. He can sometimes feel a little bit anonymous in those sort of game states. And I think right now, especially. So maybe my opinion right now is a bit reactive to the situation and to where Danny Olmo has been. But if I look at him since his last injury last season, I think he hasn't quite come back with the same force that he usually does. And when I watch him recently, I think the base value that Firmino does give us is a little bit higher. So right now, I sort of see why Firmino is starting more, but I think the
Yeah.
goal has to be to get Olmo back to his best because Danny Olmo at his best can both dominate the half spaces and also attack the box and score goals and create. And I think an important part with Olmo is also how well he works with Pedri. I think when Olmo's in the
Mhm.
side, we see a completely, well, an even better version of Pedri. And I think their harmony together just doesn't exist with Firmino in the side. That's not to say Pedri isn't great with Firmino and Firmino isn't great when Pedri's in the side, but I think Olmo and Pedri sort of add another dimension as well.
Yeah, I'm really glad that you brought that up. I agree, in principle that it's completely acceptable for me to be playing right now. He's in better form than Olmo,
Hmm.
and he's been scoring goals, and so it's completely reasonable. But I'm really glad that you brought up the connection with Pedri because that is a hugely maybe underrated. It
Hmm.
probably shouldn't be, but element of their combination is that Pedri unlocks a kind of um, he almost unlocks the 10 in him from from years back. He manages to get into offensive situations a lot more frequently when Olmo's on the pitch, and that is because, like I said, Olmo has a really good understanding of combination, and he plays those 1-2s that allows Pedri to burst forward. And yeah, so I really enjoy that dynamic as
Mhm.
well. But yeah, completely fine with Firmino getting running the team.
Yeah, no, I think like a lot of the issues, quote unquote, we've spoken about are actually positives in a lot of way. Like it's so nice to be sitting here and talking about like how we have this versatility in profiles and how each one of them could come into the side and offer a certain skill set that's valuable to very different game states. So I suppose as this podcast has gone on and I've spoken about this with you in length, I'm almost much more confident in our squad myself, which actually is quite nice. But also going on to the attack, I definitely want to ask you about Marcus Rashford. He was a signing we made over the summer. Of course, there are talks about Luis Diaz and Nico Williams, but at the end we end up with Rashford. Um, how do you see his place in the side? Because for me personally, um, I think he's a very valuable profile to have, and he can come in. He definitely is an impact player, confidence player. We saw in the game against Newcastle how things he can do, but I think he adds value as a depth signing, and that's fine to me. You know, we not everyone has to be a starter, not everyone has to be competing for the Ballon d'Or. But when Lamine and Rafinha fit, I still think they are the go-to. And I'm not really in favor of Rafinha and Rashford together with Rafinha in the middle and Rashford on the left. I just don't think that works. But where Rashford does add value, I think, is precisely in the game against Newcastle, where Lamine wasn't in the side. And last season, we struggled tremendously without Lamine Yamal. I mean, we could barely pick up points for a large stage of the season when he was out. But I do see Rashford sort of acting as a balancing act because we know Rafinha, I know it wasn't his best game against Newcastle, but in the right conditions, Rafinha can still be quite impactful in the right, and then Rashford comes in and does his thing on the left. Is that how you see it as well, or is there a world in which you see Rafinha and Rashford working together with Lamine Yamal and Lewandowski or Ferran Torres?
I think as far as kind of the dynamic goes, I agree with you that I'm not a huge fan of Rashford on the left and Rafinha in the middle, mainly
Mhm.
because it nullifies Rafinha and it weakens that role for me.
Yep.
Rafinha, like I've said already, I see him at his best as a kind of outlet, as the finishing touch to a move. And when you're a little bit deeper, I think you have to provide a bit more than that. Um, and yeah, I also agree that Rashford is a very good depth signing.
Mhm.
Um, well, maybe it's a little early to say very good, but in principle, in
Yeah.
principle, he can be a very good depth signing. Um, I have liked what I've seen from Rashford. I said it in a tweet the other day. I think that I like that he's so proactive.
Mhm.
And that's not always a good thing. You can be over exuberant and actually, early Rafinha is a good example of that. Um, but I think he adds a dimension to your attack where he's unpredictable. He makes opponent defenses a little bit fearful because he can pick up the ball and just out of nowhere accelerate into the fullback.
Yep.
Or he can deliver a knuckleball switch or a cross into the box, or he's got a really wide attacking armory. He's a good link-up player as well. Very decent
Yeah.
in tight spaces, little round the corner passes, or little cutbacks into an overlapping fullback. He has a good armory. It's just for me with Rashford, it's a question of how consistently can he produce, and it is going to
Mhm.
be his production that is what he's ultimately judged by, I think. Because I'm seeing a lot of good things, but you have to rack up goals and you have to rack up assists. You have to contribute to the attack on a consistent basis. And if he continues the form that he showed in the Newcastle game with those kind of goals, then yeah, he will be a very, very good addition to the squad. When Lamine Yamal isn't playing or when Rafinha isn't playing,
Yeah.
and yeah, I think, to answer the latter part of your question, I still would agree that Rafinha on the left, Lamine Yamal on the right, and then Ferran or Lewandowski in the middle. with an Olmo or Firmino would still be my preferred setup.
Yeah, I think with Rashford, just to finish on him, I think in a lot of ways that there are a lot of similarities between him and Rafinha, the Rafinha that joined from a psychological perspective. I think they're
Yeah.
both very high confidence players. And I think Rashford strongly needs to be feeling himself to perform. And in his last years at United, that obviously wasn't the case. And we saw a very different version of him. But I don't think that's the player he is. And we already know he can be much more than that. In a lot of ways, I think he's found the perfect manager in Flick to come in and sort of give him that confidence back and allow him to be a bit liberated in the way he operates. And I do think that Rashford at his best, I think his raw sort of physical attributes, the ability to drive into space, the pace and power, as we like to say, is very well suited to La Liga and La Liga defenses. I think that's something that the league doesn't have a lot of, and the players who can do that consistently, like even with Rafinha, generally do very well in La Liga, perhaps more so than the Premier League.
Yeah, I totally agree, and I would love to see from Rashford the kind of glow up, that we've seen from Rafinha, a guy who was very, exuberant, kind of maybe a little bit immature in the way that he carried himself around the pitch, always trying to make something happen. Always felt a little bit unsure. But now look at him. He's just ultra confident in everything that
Yeah.
he does. And when something doesn't come off for him, he kind of just brushes it off and gets going. And
Yeah.
I would love to see that kind of confidence boost from Rashford because, yeah, I see similarities in their situation. And if he could unlock that level of consistency, then yeah, he'd be some player.
I completely agree. Now, this is moving on to something I've actually been very interested to ask you about away from the podcast, just my own sort of conversation with you, is the striker situation. Now, we have Ferran Torres, who's been in great form. We have Lewandowski, who is aging, but, the season he produced last year completely blew me away. I still think Lewandowski adds a lot to this side as a hold-up outlet, as a link-up outlet, as someone who can dominate the box. I think he works really well with Rafinha and Lewandowski and Yamal too. But how do you see the striker situation now? I'm aware a lot of this would depend on the version of Lewandowski we get this year. I think when strikers approach this age, the decline can be quite volatile in a lot of ways. They're great one season and then they come in and things can go downhill. We haven't seen that from Lewandowski so far. I really liked his Newcastle performance, even though he wasn't very involved, but the signs were there, and also his cameo the other week. But how do you see the striker situation? Are you as high on having let's say, a more established goal scorer and a box threat, or do you think Ferran's mobility in running in behind and also his link-up play, which I think is pretty underrated, do you see that being a factor where this season we don't have a clear sort of nine and we'll see a lot of rotation between Ferran and Lewandowski?
Yeah, I think we will. And kind of, I suppose it's the theme that's been running through this entire conversation is that, the differences in players gives the team a lot of options. Um, I also really liked the Newcastle performance, and it's no surprise really that in that kind of game he was valuable because one thing that Lewandowski does give you is he does give you an outlet. Against a very aggressive man-to-man press, the level of strength, but also intelligence you have to hold off defenders constantly who are right on your back every single time you receive the ball. That's useful. If
Yep.
you have a centre forward that can't deal with that kind of physicality in a duel, then you're going to get pressed off the pitch, and Lewandowski does that a lot better than anyone else, any other centre forward that Barca can field. So incredibly useful. And then on the flip side, he hasn't lost his goal scoring touch at all. Let's be honest. Put in the position, he's going to finish, and you could probably say the complete opposite about Ferran Torres. He's been more consistent with his finishing, but you don't trust him in a 1v1 situation like you trust Lewandowski. On the flip side, I really, really like what Ferran brings to the team. You said his link-up play is underrated, and I agree. He can look a little bit, I don't know, uncomfortable or messy in his kind of ball reception and first touch, but he tends to pull it off, kind of
Yeah.
Suarez-like in a way. I'm not comparing the two quality-wise at all, but in the kind of messiness of how they go about their work. Um, And yeah, I think his assist the other week, the little flick around the corner was beautiful, and it's an aspect of his game that I think elevates the team more so than when Lewandowski's on the pitch.
Yeah.
I do like the Barcelona, the fluidity of the Barcelona attack more when Ferran is on the pitch. Um, but yeah, he also missed like 2 huge chances in that game against Valencia that he should have scored.
Yeah.
So it's yeah, it's another one where you have very different players that give you options.
I think, I kind of get frustrated a little bit with the discourse around Ferran Torres on Twitter. I think he is a extremely valuable profile first and foremost, and of course he has the potential to look frustrating, to miss chances, and he needs to be better. I think if you're looking at him as a potential starting striker, these are things he has to be more efficient in. But just as a profile, I think the danger he creates, his mobility to run in behind, and as you said as well, with his link-up play, to always be in the game, to always find himself as sort of an XG generating magnet, I think is very valuable. And I think that's a part of the game that on social media, especially in this era where it's all about clip farming and sensationalism and posting, you know, missed chances and making fun of that. I think that gets missed. It's so important as a striker. To me, it's more important to be in the position to score goals than it is to maybe score one goal and be very efficient, but do so like every 5 games. We saw
Mhm.
Haaland at United, for example, a great player, but at United, he just wasn't taking enough shots. He wasn't involved enough. Of course, that's a microcosm of a lot of different things, but I would rather prefer a striker who's always in the action. And that's kind of just my opinion on Ferran Torres. I think he is extremely valuable.
Yeah, I'm with you. And to be fair to Ferran, he almost always has been. He's the kind of player
Hmm.
that you can understand why, he gets so much game time and managers like him. And he's had to face stiff competition since he's come into the squad. And he always seems to work his way back in. And I think it goes to what you're saying. He does the fundamentals extremely well. He makes defenses think. He creates passing options for his teammates. He's in and around the box in goal scoring situations, and he's an intelligent footballer. And
Hmm.
yeah, I'm very happy with his development. Like you said, if he is to be a long term, um, focal point of Barcelona, then he's going to have to get more consistent with his
Yeah.
finishing. But as the balance to Lewandowski right now, I think is great.
Well, like, I think this is an interesting conversation to segue off as well, because I see this narrative online about there's this word that I really have a problem with, and it gets me all the time. Barca coded. And I've seen people with a straight face suggest that we wouldn't be better off with a player like Erling Haaland as our striker because he isn't Barca coded and he would be a net negative to this side. To
Mhm.
me, I find that quite ridiculous personally, but I want to know your take. Like, let's assume we sign Erling Haaland, for me, the best striker in the world, or at least top two.
Mhm.
How would you see him? Do you think he'd be a net negative to this side?
No, he wouldn't be a net negative. I think the one thing that you always have to consider is, especially when you're signing, elite players, that the kinds of players that we're talking about here, Erling Haaland, one of the, if not the best centre forward in the world,
Hmm.
is what does he demand then? Because when you're bringing in a player like that, you can't just he's not just going to slot in.
Hmm.
You have to make sure that you're maximizing his strengths to get the absolute best out of a potential world beater. And so, the slight shift in emphasis that City have made as a result of his introduction is they've invested in being a little more direct. They've
Yeah.
invested in signing direct players that can work in transition. If they're going to bait the press and then hit the space in behind, they've got players that can do that. They've tried
Hmm.
to sign players in the wide positions that give service to him. So when you sign a player like that, you have to bear in mind, what do you need to make sure that he's getting his absolute best? Because if you're
Hmm.
probably going to spend a heck load of money on them, um, and in the specific case of Haaland and Barcelona, you know, we've seen a Barcelona that can operate kind of in that more direct fashion.
Hmm.
Uh, Especially, against teams in the Champions League who maybe sit off a little bit less and press a little bit more aggressively. In Rafinha, in Firmino, in Varane even, Barcelona have had have the tools to play that kind of more direct manner.
Yeah.
And so in this specific example, because I think, it's all has to be nuanced and contextualized. In this specific
Mhm.
example, then I think Haaland would be a fantastic signing.
Yeah.
Now, would that take away from some aspects of Barcelona's game? Yes, probably. And the concerns that I would have is, well, if we're going to be a little more direct, then what does that mean for Pedri and De Jong, for example? Are they still getting on the ball as much as they should be? Are we still playing a game that goes through them? Because if
Mhm.
you're not, then you're reducing the quality that you already have, and you're trying to make compromises. And so I think it's not as simple as they're the best player in the world, so we sign them. There has to be some uh, understanding of the context that you're putting them into. But in this specific example, I think it would probably work out for the better. But yeah, I would have some concerns, with what I've just said at the end there. But
Mhm.
I wouldn't be against signing Haaland. That's for damn sure.
No, I think that's a very, very good point as well. I think you explained it in a very good way. I suppose the reason we talk about this striker situation is it is something that is coming up. Lewandowski isn't going to be around forever. He's not going to be around for much longer in this side.
Hmm.
But the idea is the striker market right now. I don't know how you see it, but I see it as being very bleak. I think you're paying ridiculous amounts just because there is so much demand and the supply isn't very high for players who really aren't guarantees. You're paying 80, 90, 100 million for players who've maybe had one good season. And that's not to say they aren't good players and they can't add value. They obviously are, but if you look at the state of our finances and how we've struggled as well with spending, I for me personally, I would much rather invest in someone I know is going to be as close to a guarantee as possible, as opposed to taking the punt on a project for a lot of money, way over their market value. I think the
Hmm.
striker Newcastle has. I don't want to pronounce his name because my German isn't very good, but I think he went for over 80 million, and then that's on the back of one season in the Bundesliga with about 15 goals.
Yeah.
And I don't want us to be in that position. So when I look at like suggestions, obviously Haaland, I think it's very unrealistic naturally, so I don't want to talk about it too much. But one striker, before we move on, that I think is very interesting and is Harry Kane. Now, Harry Kane has a release clause, and his contract is up soon. And there is the potential for Barcelona to recreate a Lewandowski 2.0 in replacing Lewandowski. Um,
Mm.
I sort of see the value in going down that route because I think Kane is still the top two striker in the world, and I think he can still add a lot of value. And I think if you look at his style, I think it's very, very much suited in a lot of ways to how we can play, especially with his link up play being out of this world. And in La Liga as well, I think Kane could come in and give us a good 2-3 years, very similar to Lewandowski. And there's almost more value in that to me if we are going to sign a striker than going and spending 80 to 100 million on someone who really at the end of the day is a bit of a gamble.
Yeah, and it's funny because when you said you think that Haaland's the best striker in the world, I think Kane.
Yeah, yeah.
I think that you can definitely argue that maybe the peak of Haaland's physical prowess and finishing ability potentially eclipse Kane, but as an all round package, I think he's
Hmm.
pretty complete. I don't really see any weakness in Harry Kane's game, to be honest with you. Maybe that's
Hmm.
the English bias coming through. Although I'm not always that optimistic about English players. Um, but I think, yeah, if I had the option to sign Kane in, what did you say, 2 years, a year?
I think his release clause at the end of the year is about less than 60 million.
Yeah, I would snap that up 100% of the time. There would be no doubt in my mind, to be honest with you.
Mm,
You're getting, like I said, what I consider to be the best centre forward in the world, and if you can get
mhm.
2 or 3 good seasons out of him, then yeah, that's a no brainer for me.
Yeah, I mean, in a lot of ways, I think he could come in and maybe even replicate or do better than Lewandowski, which we know, by the way, when Lewandowski came in, this isn't a signing I was in favour of, given the finances, his salary, the stage we were at that point. But he's come in, and to be honest, maybe I'm in the minority here, but the way he's performed has eclipsed all expectations for me, and I think my image of Lewandowski and how I rated him as a footballer has gone up tremendously. But at the same time, I think Harry Kane could come in and replicate that. And let's say he gives us 25, 30 goals a season for the next 3 years. I think that's better or more than almost any striker that's available in the market would right now, because we know Haaland, anyway, it isn't realistic.
Yeah, yeah, 100%. Um, I think, it is obviously the situation's a bit different, is that Lewandowski came in
Mhm.
kind of in a salvage job almost at the time.
Yeah,
But very, very important because he brought that level of just established elite quality.
yeah.
And, I think people underestimate, how important it is. This almost sounds ridiculous to say, but people underestimate how important it is to have just established elite players.
Mhm.
Um, Everybody is looking for a project player. Everybody wants the next big whatever, the next young prospect.
Mhm.
But having these quality elite players that are a guarantee is the best that anybody could ask for at a football club.
Yeah,
And shying away from those kind of players because of their age or whatever is I find really nonsensical.
yeah.
So yeah, I'd be absolutely in favor of that.
Yeah, no, completely agree, especially as well, given how young this squad already is. I
Hmm.
think Inigo Martinez, like you said, personified that leadership figure, and Lewandowski, in a lot of ways, has done the same. So, having someone more established, I think we're in a position now where we don't need to be signing 18, 19-year-olds as projects year in, year out, but we can, maybe focus on signing more consolidated, established players. And for me, that is a very viable way to go. Now, before we end, because I know I've kept you for long on a weekend, mate, so thank you so much again. But we have one of the most exciting games in football coming up in about 2 weeks, and it is so exciting that I actually booked tickets to go and watch the game in the Camp Nou, the Barcelona PSG game. And
Wow.
because I didn't want to risk it, I booked extremely expensive VIP tickets, and oh man, if we lose that game, it's going to be one of the saddest days of my life, just because it's going to be the bank account gone and also my beloved club losing. But Barcelona PSG, just tell me how excited you are, and how you sort of see this game going, and maybe the things briefly that maybe you look out for or we should be excited for.
Yeah, I mean, it's probably, from my perspective, maybe the best two teams in the world, probably the two most exciting teams in the world.
Mhm.
Um, and it's very, very hard to predict what's going to happen because I frankly believe that anything could happen.
Yeah.
It could be a huge, route either way. You know, Barca could win 4-0 or PSG could win 4-0, or it could be, a cagey 0-0. I think absolutely anything could happen, purely because of the level of quality on the pitch, and
Yeah.
who brings the performance to the table on that day. And so I think from a Barcelona perspective, it is a huge, huge opportunity in terms of
Mhm.
belief that you can win anything. And we've been on kind of I suppose, a ramp of a journey of belief over the last few years with a very young squad, and little by little, kind of believing more and more that you can compete at the top level. Because in the early days of Xavi, just coming out of an era of a really inconsistent squad and performances, losses to Bayern again in the Champions League, and it felt like it was just too big a step. This is an opportunity to establish yourself as, possibly the favorite in the competition. So,
Mhm.
a huge game, and one that I'm a little nervous about, to be honest, because
Yeah.
like I said, I think it really could go either way,
Yeah.
in a big way. But I think it's a game of football that we've all got to try and enjoy.
No, I completely agree. When you look at like these sort of games, the margin for error is so small and so minute that it does come down in a lot of ways to individuality and what individuals step up on the day. It kind of reminds me of the Bayern game last year. Like I know we won that game 4-1, but a lot of that also came down to Rafinha putting in a freakish
Yeah.
finishing performance and taking his chances with that hat trick. So I think it could go either way, but I don't think the scoreline will or could necessarily reflect the the actual golfing class between the sides, because frankly, it is very close, and these are probably at least the two top three, top four sides in the world. But maybe a little bit stylistically, like I always thought that Newcastle was going to be a threat stylistically, right? Because they had a very physical side away from home with the atmosphere, and two very quick runners on either side. They had the height to head us in corners. I thought that was a very important test to get past, and I'm very glad we did. PSG are, of course, a different side. You know, they're closer to a little bit like us, of course, Luis Enrique, but they also have their own distinct threats with the wing backs being so attacking and aggressive, and the midfield, who perhaps is the most technically proficient midfield we're ever going to face. Pedri and Frankie De Jong have probably never faced a midfield as technically proficient as the one PSG have got right now. And there's another thing there, that they do have a certain numerical advantage with a more traditional 4-3-3 with Fabian, Jan Neves, and Vitinha. So sort of stylistically, how do you see them stacking up to us? And do you think it's a good matchup for us, or are you a bit more apprehensive about all of it?
I am slightly concerned, I'll be honest.
Mhm,
Mainly about their ability to hurt us. I think, you know, the margins of that high line are really fine, and
mhm,
it'll be interesting to see what kind of defensive approach Flick prefers in that game, because the Bayern game was a perfect example. I That was a game that, you know, that Barcelona could have conceded like 3 times in the first half, and the whole trajectory of the project changes, to be honest with you. And it's the kind of thing that could happen in this game as well. I don't wanna be too pessimistic, because, you know, that hasn't happened yet really against anybody.
mhm.
And this team has always found a way to compete. So I don't want to be overly pessimistic, but I do concern I am concerned slightly defensively about
Yeah.
what you know, Kvaratskhelia and Barcola and the co can do, because, you know, they're dangerous players against a
Yeah.
team that's not used to defending that much.
Mhm,
So yeah, but on the flip side, I think you could probably say the same about Barcelona's threat.
mhm,
PSG also very, very aggressive. You know, they do like to go man to man as well, and space is going to be there to hurt them. Barcelona can for sure have spells of possession against that team, absolutely no doubt. So yeah, it's just I don't know. It's one that I'm definitely cautious of commenting too much on, because of the the potential for both disaster and elation.
I
You
know,
know.
yeah, and we know with the culture, people are going to click this. You don't want to make any bold predictions and see
Exactly.
yourself online. But
Exactly.
what I will say is, for this game, I think it's extremely important that we have Balde fit, because, you know,
Hmm.
having Jad Martin isolated against Kvaratskhelia or Barcola or Doué or whoever's fit. I mean, PSG just have so much firepower. Like, we saw how Alenga sort of breezed past Martin over and over again, but we know he didn't have the end product, and Newcastle didn't have the end product ahead of us. But PSG is a completely different side. You know, if Martin gets beat one on one, and then we're stuck in a break or in a counter, we know for a fact that PSG at least are going to hurt us way more than the Newcastle managed to. Well, that's kind of the assumption you'd make, at least, and I'm just way more comfortable naturally having someone like Balde in for the defensive side of things. Um, and I assume you'd agree with that as well.
Yeah, for sure, for sure.
But I suppose, just to close off on this, I think you made a very good point about the Bayern game and how that sort of changed the perception about this entire project. I think this PSG game is going to be very similar, because um, everyone knows, you know, at this point we've established ourselves as one of the best sides in the world, but beating the reigning European champion, the side that's basically dominated everyone. I know the Club World Cup was a little bit of an insult to them, but I think winning this game could set up the entire season for Barcelona, and I think it takes us in a lot of different ways to that next level where we can well and truly count ourselves as a side that can go toe to toe with the best and come out on top. And I think that's probably what I'm most excited for, and that's why I've invested so much of my own time and money to go and watch it live. But how important do you think the outcome could be? And on the other hand, if a loss does take place, a big loss, which I'm not saying will happen, but hypothetically, I think that also could create another challenge for Flick to see how this side bounces back from something that's never really happened before, which is a big setback.
Yeah, exactly. And I think the outcome of this game really is going to be entirely psychological because I think
Hmm.
Barcelona qualify regardless of the score in this game. From a sporting perspective, it's probably not going to be that relevant, but psychologically it is. And I think that you're absolutely right that if something bad does happen, then it does create a new challenge. But I think, what I want to see in that game is I want to see, because a lot of times over the past few years, I've seen Barcelona play in Champions League games with this kind of underdog mentality almost,
Hmm.
um, and be okay with compromising your game for the sake of trying to hurt the opposition. Whether that's going a lot more direct or whatever it is. I want to see Frankie De Jong and Pedri get on the ball. I want to see Barcelona express themselves because if
Yeah.
they can do that, then no matter what the score is or the outcome of the game, then you can take a lot of positives from it. If you kind of
Hmm.
cower and try and play a different game because you're afraid of what might happen, then I think the ramifications of that would be worse. And what I love is that I don't think Flick is anywhere near that kind of manager,
Yeah.
so I don't think
Yeah.
we're going to see that whatsoever. So
Yeah.
yeah, I hope they express themselves and that we see how good they are because these are
Yeah.
exceptional footballers.
Well, yeah, just lastly, I think truly is the battle like of the two best midfields in the world. I personally, I think Frankie and Pedri can dominate any team, any midfield in the world. But I think PSG will be the biggest test. How do you sort of see the two midfields, the contrast, the comparison, and are you confident in like Frankie and Pedri, as you just mentioned, being able to take the game by the scruff of the neck and then dominate the ball and ping it around?
Yeah, I am confident that they can do that, and but I'm also confident that PSG will have spells of possession as well for the same
Hmm.
reason.
Hmm.
PSG are a extremely um, well drilled side. That in terms of the possession and the rotations that they make, so automatic. So it happens in such a flow. You know,
Hmm. Hmm.
and because of that, on the best of days, I think Barcelona's press can be a little bit, uh, maybe a little bit messy.
Hmm.
And so I do think that, PSG will be able to get their foot on the ball and play. But equally, I see Barcelona having spells as well. So I think it's a game that we're likely to see go back and forth. I don't envisage one team absolutely dominating.
Yeah.
And then
No.
it's more than likely to come down to, who's taking the chances, who's more decisive, because those chances are going to come about, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, mate, no, I completely agree again. I think I'm not just saying this because you're my guest and this is the first podcast, but I think just the value you've added, I think very like-minded in that regard, and I think we've pulled it off well. Before we end, I just had a follower question. I deleted this because something was going on with the Twitter algorithm, but a few people did send me DMs. I picked one question that maybe we could end on, which is for you. What
Right.
is the biggest football myth you think should be debunked?
Oh
Or
man.
a football it's a very loaded question, but if there's something that comes to mind. This is from Gus, by the way, someone I follow, a mutual as well, and he seemed to think it'd be a good question.
The biggest football myth. There's probably quite a few. Uh,
Yeah.
there's a lot of stuff I see that frustrates me, so it should be quite easy for me to think of one. Maybe, I suppose maybe what I'd say, kind of an extension of what I said earlier, um, that, you know, there's so many. Okay, maybe I can't give you the biggest, but I can give you
Yeah.
one that
Just
that
one,
I
yeah.
think exists.
Fair enough.
Yeah, I think when teams kind of sign a player, and they're looking at their age a lot of the time, and I think there's a perception that a younger player is better.
Mhm.
And I think that just misses out so much of of potential in footballers. And
Yeah.
you know, if you see a footballer that's 26 or 27 and they haven't maybe lit up the world until this point, I think it's a reasonable. I think it's a football myth, that
Mhm.
they're not good enough to
Yeah.
perform at the top level, and I don't see that. I think context is everything, and I think there's value in players in synergies that are yet to be tapped into, and so yeah, just signing a young player, the next big thing, because that's what you think is the most valuable is a pretty big myth for me.
And on the other hand of that, on the other side of the spectrum, I'd also say that it's a myth that when a footballer turns 30 or 31, they're automatically should be shifted out. They're not good enough anymore. They're
Yeah.
deteriorating. I think in today's game, especially, maybe that was the case 30, 40 years ago, but in today's game where uh, I would argue that players have actually, if you look at like the elite, they've gone on to do some remarkable things beyond 30. I think 30 isn't old at all. Like if you look at, of course, Messi, Ronaldo, natural, but also guys like Lewandowski and Kane and Inigo Martinez at Barcelona is a great example. So um, age is a big myth. I don't want to go into the
Yeah.
cliche of like age
Yeah,
is
yeah.
just a number, but it really just is a lot of the times. And like you said, on both ends of the spectrum. So sign players in their primes. Don't be afraid to sign older players if you think they add quality. I think gravitating towards young isn't always great. And we've seen so many projects sort of almost collapse because of that fixation with going young, young, young. I mean, United as well is a good example of signing younger players without the experience of playing for a big club from lower leagues, and you put them into an environment where there are no established players, and you end up with a project that just doesn't work.
Yeah. God, I hope there's no United fans listening to this because they're
United
constantly
have
the
caught so many
example.
strays in this podcast. My God.
I love it though.
But yeah, mate, I've kept you for so long. I think it's a good time to end. Thank you so much for coming on. I think this podcast has given me so much confidence as well. I was a bit nervous generally coming into it just because it's the first episode, but you've come in and I truly, this would be, if I was listening, I'd be very happy with all the input and insight you've given. So thank you so much, and we should definitely catch up sometime again and run it back.
No, thank you. Thank you so much for having me. I've really enjoyed it. It's been a great conversation, and yeah, more than happy to come back. Just hit up the DMs once again, and we'll see what we can do.
Yep, and for all the listeners, if you've made it this far, I mean, I can only assume you've liked the podcast because it's been well over an hour as well now. All I can say is I am going to be working on getting as many great guests as possible, like the Purist. I'm already working behind the scenes to invite people on, and rest assured, the content is going to continue. Maybe a little break because I have to go and watch Barcelona PSG, and then if they lose, I might take a sabbatical for a little while. But I will be back, and yeah, thank you guys for listening, and then the Purists again. Thank you, mate, so much for coming on.
Been a pleasure. Thanks.
Thanks.
Neal Talks Football. Thank you for listening.